Welcome back, everybody. Today we are going to talk about paint stains. I've mentioned paint stains a couple times in the past. However, I wanted to go back over it again, kind of do an introductory guide to paint stains, because I have a few different videos coming up soon that really dives deep into paint stains and what you can do with them. So I figure we'll just start from the beginning and give you a kind of simplified guide to paint stains. So what are paint stains? Simply enough, a paint stain is just a very heavy paint wash. However, the reason I just don't call it a heavy paint wash is because the reasons for the application of the wash are different. With a wash, you normally just want the color in the recesses and not tinting the base coat. However, with a paint stain, you actually want the wash thick enough so it does tint the base coat. And by doing that, it adds a lot more color to your miniature depending on what colors you're using. In this case, I'm going to keep things fairly simple. We're beginning with desert yellow mixed with a little bit of beige red. And this is our base coat. We are not worrying about shade until we get to our stain step. After about 2 coats of our base coat, we can do our stain, in this case model color flat brown. And perfect example here of the consistency that you're looking for with your paint stain. Not so thin that it doesn't color the base coat, but not so thick that it completely covers the base coat. The most important part at this step is to just make sure that you don't miss any of the skin. You can be fairly liberal here with the application because the paint is not thinned too much beyond the point of breaking the binder. You can be very liberal and just slap the paint all over and really don't have to worry about tide marks. You may be asking why paint stains. Well, it's one of the painting methods that I've come up with that I think is the most fun painting I've almost ever done. Paint stains are a very freestyle way of painting. We just slap a bunch of heavy washes on, splash some color, then there's a cleanup stage, and then we move on to the actual layering. And it's, like I said, you can get very creative with this technique, and you get color combinations that you can't get by mixing the colors together on your palette. Layering one on top of the other, you can get some very funky effects, and it's very interesting just to see what you can create. In this basics guide here, I'm not getting too funky, to be honest. I am using more of a reddish brown wash over a yellow base coat, which normally you probably wouldn't do, but trust me, it's going to work here. Once our stain is dry, we can move on to the wash stage, again with flat brown. Here I'm doubling up the flat brown in the recesses, basically the deepest recesses and the secondary recesses. So with this wash, I'm applying a second layer of flat brown, building up that darker color. And this application is, like I said, more of a spot wash. I'm not being super careful about it. Still a bit freestyle, not as dump on a bunch of wash as we did with our paint stain, but working more in somewhat precise areas. Just get it into the recesses. Third and final wash, we're grabbing our game color charred brown. And here our application's getting a little bit more precise because I want the charred brown just in the deepest recesses. Because we still have our paint as a wash consistency, it's still fairly easy to apply. We're just kind of doing a dark line, getting a little bit more color wherever I think it needs it, and that's about it. Now, I want you to look at what we have here so far. Remember what we did. We did a base coat, we did a stain, we did a wash, and then more precision deep recess wash. And just looking at the model right now, I don't think it looks too bad, and all we've done is slap around some thin paint on it. So if you were in a rush, you can just use washes to paint your stuff. Just start with the light base coat, do a stain, a wash, and a wash, even maybe a third wash, you never know. You don't necessarily have to put on the highlights because, well, you've highlighted it while washing it. Or, if you're like me, we can continue on and actually put more highlighting into the paint. So here comes the one difficult stage of this painting process, the cleanup stage. Right now, our skin is going to be looking a little blotchy because of all the stains and the washes, and we've used several colors as well. So what we want to do is basically clean up the skin a little bit to prep it for our highlights. The problem here is we simply can't just mix together all the colors that we've already used, because mixing them together on our palette, we're going to get a different color than the one we achieved by layering or washing all those colors one on top of each other. So this takes a little bit of experience where you have to judge by eye what colors are currently do I see on the miniature, and then what do I need to mix to match that so I could do a cleanup layer. In this case, since the colors I've been using aren't too bizarre, mixing the desert yellow with the flat brown got me close to what I needed. However, because of the red and the brown going over the yellow, that gave the skin an orange tint. So I needed to mix some orange, in this case light brown, in to achieve the color that was closest to what is currently on the skin. So at this stage, we want to go very, very thin with the paint here because that'll make cleaning it up much easier. And the thinner the paint, the less accurate your color match needs to be. And really, all I want to do here is just do a little bit of cleanup. I don't want a perfectly, Barbie smooth skin job here. If there's a little bit of blotchiness underlying, that's totally fine. It adds character to the skin. Think about this more as a tidying up stage, and you don't want to overdo it. And to be honest, I did overdo it on this particular miniature. I cleaned up a little bit too much, and I lost some of that nice subtle nuance that the stain gave me. So we'll continue on, but yeah, too bad for me. So now that we have the skin cleaned up and we've simplified the colors that we're currently using on the miniature, as we get into the highlighting stages, it makes things much more simple. Out that cleanup stage, I would have to figure out what colors are currently on the miniature, plus what I have to add to highlight, and try to mix up a highlight color to go onto our base coat. By kind of reestablishing the base coat, you simplify things, and then you can just easily add one or two colors for your highlighting. In my case here, first highlight layer just added a little bit more of that desert yellow, and then on top of that, I'm going to do two highlights of basic skin tone. So just take a moment and think about all the colors that we currently have on this miniature. We have a yellowish skin tone that had a hint of red in it with our beige red, put a reddish brown wash on it, which created a bit of an orange tone to our skin. We went darker brown for our washes. Now in our highlights, reestablishing some of that yellow tone, and then from there going to a basic skin tone, which gives it a very subtle pink hue. So a lot of colors working on this miniature. And just because we have a lot of colors working on this miniature, it doesn't mean that I cannot add more. Using glazes, we can still add hints of color into our miniature. In this case, with the recesses, starting off with Gain Color Evil Red. Reminder, a glaze is like a super duper thinned layer, basically just adding hints of color, a tint essentially. And this purplish red color here of our Evil Red is going to work very well with that dark brown with the hint of red we have in the recesses already. And then for our highlights, a glaze mix of brown rose and scarlet blood. I tend to put this color wherever I want it, But in general, it goes in the face, the cheekbones, nose, ears, and then on the knuckles, knees, elbow, occasionally a few other highlight regions. But again, we just want to add a little bit of a hint of color. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is our paint stain two-headed ogre. As I said in the beginning, this is one of my most recently discovered, invented, fun ways of miniature painting, because it is so much fun. It's very experimental. It's very easy to do. It's half of it's just splashing washes onto the miniature, sometimes using very oddball colors, and just seeing what happens and how I can make this work once you figure out what's on your miniature. For this video, I wanted to keep things fairly simple. It is supposed to be an introductory guide, so I didn't go too crazy with our base coat and stain colors. A reddish brown over a desert yellow is not very extreme. The real fun with this technique is when you do get extreme, pick like, I don't know, gray base coat and put a purple wash over it, and then you end up having to add blue or flesh color into it when you do the highlights or the cleanup stages. You can get some beautiful color transitions just by experimenting with it and seeing what happens. But we'll save that for a future video where we get a little bit more funky with this. The hardest part of this technique is the cleanup stage, because you do have to have a good eye for colors to determine what I need to recreate what is currently on the miniature and not just mix up the colors that I already use. So that can be a little bit tricky, but don't be afraid to grab colors that you didn't plan on using before. I had to introduce some orange because the red in the brown over the yellow, desert yellow, created a bit of an orange effect. So I had to grab light brown, which has an orange hint to it, to make it match. But again, very fun painting technique. Try it out, get funky with it, see what happens. Hope you enjoyed this, and see you next time. Bye-bye.
I've administered beatings to nearly 3,000 clients. Whoa!